Hi, this is your host, Laura Powers, and I'm so pleased to have Jennifer Quintan back on the show. You've heard her on here before. She is an astrologer. She runs the Modern Mystical Mama blog and podcast. And today we're going to be really focusing on astrology, and specifically astrology coming up in the new year for the United States and 2021, and some of the impacts of the previous astrology that has led us to where we are today. So thanks so much, Jennifer, for coming back on the show.
Thanks for having me. It's exciting.
It's fun. I can also feel
being on your podcast.
I love it, and I can feel like you can kind of soak in the Maui energy from from podcasting with you. So you also run the amazing Kauka healing garden out there. I know such an amazing energy to be in. So before we launch into the topic, can you share a little bit about what's happened since the last time we talked? Because I think it's pretty wild to have watched it all unfold.
Yes, I think we probably connected early in 2020, and just from like kind of a astrology perspective, 2020 was a really unusual year. So I thought I'd spend a minute talking kind of about the macrocosm of 2020 and 2021, so we could kind of keep that kind of big picture in our mind as we dive into some details. So 2020 had 6 eclipses. Most years have about 3. But 2020 had 6, and actually the first eclipse in 2020 was January 10th, but it was related to an eclipse that happened in December of 2019. So you can almost think of it like there was 7 eclipses that were impacting 2020. And an eclipse is, obviously everybody knows what an eclipse is, but from an astrological perspective, an eclipse can bring about kind of sudden news or sudden change. And so one of my favorite astrologers that I follow is Susan Miller, and she always would say, don't try to start anything or make any big decisions around eclipse time, because you don't really know what's coming. You can see what house the eclipse is falling in. You can see what degrees the eclipse is at and where that might touch your own birth chart based on the degrees of the planets in your birth chart. So you know where it might be, that energy might be touching your own energy. But she always just says, let's just wait for the news of the eclipse to deliver whatever it's going to deliver, and then make plans based on that. So we had 6 times this year when that happened, which is a lot to like deal with news, right, wise. So, and not every eclipse will touch every person, but a lot of these eclipses were touching people related to politics, people in our the president, the vice, Biden, like, so they were being impacted by these eclipses. The United States as a whole might have been being impacted by these eclipses, other countries. So there's a lot of different people that would be touched off, and there was many opportunities this year. The other thing is that for the last, I don't know, like 200 years, the eclipses have all been in earthy signs, like, let's see, they were in like Taurus, Capricorn. And so at the very end of 2020, we had an eclipse pair that came in an air sign for the first time. So Gemini, Sag.
Jennifer, so it's a big shift. I just pause the recording for just a second. If you can, just a little bit of audio coaching here, if you can, instead of saying if you can just pause, it's so much better. So there's definitely a lot of ums coming out, and I can have my editor edit out some of them, but it's just, if you could just pause, it's just be a lot cleaner, both for editing and also sometimes we might not need to edit, because the pause is better than an
Right. I'm not always conscious of it, so thank you for
yeah, that's okay. I was noticing there were quite a few. So all right, so I'll just get this started again. All right, I'm just hearing this sound again, so can you repeat that last part?
Oh, so it's interesting. We think of it like this has had such a hit to our economy, but in reality, trillions of dollars have been released into the economy, and that was Jupiter's part in the pandemic.
Yeah, so it's really interesting with these economic impacts, because I know that overall there's definitely a lot of people having economic struggles, but there's also a lot of people doing very well. And you look at like the stock market, for example, and it's like really high. So it's this strange kind of dichotomy that's happening right now.
Yeah, so there's definitely pockets where Jupiter put a lot of money back into the mix. And so people who are able to take advantage of that are going to do really well. Even my sister was saying that she's spent a lot less money this year than she normally would because they haven't been going anywhere. So she had some reserves. So I think different people might be able to find that wealth in different ways. But there's definitely been a lot of money put back into the system, and that's Jupiter's role. There was a rare Saturn-Pluto conjunction on January 12th, right at the beginning of 2020. And that happened in 1982, and it happened in 1947, but in different signs. So I spent a little bit of time looking back, because it's a very rare conjunction. So I spent a little time looking back to see what happened in 1982 and what happened in 1947. And when I just Googled 1982, the news that kind of popped up was, that was the year, and I don't know if you remember, I might be a little older than you, but that the Tylenol got poisoned. Somebody put arsenic or something in Tylenol, and they had to pull it off all the shelves. And it was a big thing. And I remember being a kid, and everybody was flipping out about not taking Tylenol. I guess in 1982, we thought we couldn't live without Tylenol. So there was that. And then in 1947, I was looking at that year, that was like the end of World War II, the start of this, really Israel. The Hollywood blacklist for communists happened in 1947. The Roswell alien crash happened in 1947.
Oh, wow.
So there's the Black Dahlia murder happened in 1947.
I will say that I've been talking about this a lot, that there's been a lot of World War II patterns playing out again now. So I didn't know that about that particular aspect of astrology, but I have really felt that, like these themes just playing out over and over again from World War II.
So we had that conjunction right at the beginning of 2020. So we had astrologers were kind of freaking out. I was at the astrology panel at the Conscious Life Expo in LA in January. And the astrologers were like, this is a weird year. We have all these eclipses, and then we have these crazy rare conjunctions happening. And there's a ton of squares happening. And they were saying that there's a lot of repeat patterns from like the end of World War II, a lot of repeat patterns from past pandemics, a lot of repeat patterns even from Civil War era. And so they were like, we don't know what's going to happen. It's going to be not a normal year. And they were saying that in January. And then of course, by March, we all saw the pandemic was starting to happen. Lockdowns happened, which nobody would have predicted really. And then it's also an election year. So now we're kind of in that moment.
It makes sense. And I just want to touch in here that I think a lot of times psychic sensitive people will feel something coming, but they don't necessarily know exactly what. And I will say I felt that. I felt like something coming, and even January, February, even in December, I was like, what is this that I'm feeling? But I couldn't, put my finger on it. It was just like, I knew it was going to be something big. And strangely, I also felt there were going to be good elements, and there have been some good elements in terms of, a lot of things have been brought up for us, and we, it's in a way, it's an opportunity to really work through a lot of stuff that's holding us back, and then we can move forward more quickly. So there's definitely been some silver linings, but I think a lot of us could feel something coming, even if we didn't know exactly what it was.
Yeah, I remember going to like a vision boarding party in January 2020 and feeling like such a fraud. Like all these women were like doing these vision boards, and it was going to be their greatest year. And I was like, it's a 4-year, numerologically, it's a 4-year. Just as an astrologer, seeing all the pattern shifting and all the really hard aspects, I was like, this is not going to be your dream year. This is going to be a hard year, and change is hard. And that's kind of what we've had to go through this year. It's a lot of shifting, a lot of changing, ends of era kind of stuff, and beginning of a new era.
And what is this next year, numerologically speaking, the 2021?
It's a 5. 2021 is a 5-year.
And what does that mean generally? I mean, when I think of 5, I think of change, but I'd love to hear your perspective on that.
So 5 is creative energy. It's also aligned with a democratic process, that we have a voice and that we use it to say what we want. So for me, 5 is about choices. It's also about movement. If you have like a house that's a 5 numerologically, it's a house where you're going to either be a person that travels a lot and is at home a lot, or there'll be a lot of tenants shifting through. So it's about movement, it's about change, but it's also about change in a way that you're choosing. It's you're using your voice and your creative energy. So I
Okay,
think
interesting.
for 2021, unlike 2020, which is a 4-year, which is about foundations and home, we were all stuck at home and we were all reevaluating
Yes.
our foundations, right? 2021 is about where do you want to be in the world and what choices are you going to make to align yourself with what you want to be doing.
Interesting. Yeah, I can see that. But interestingly, I feel like the 4 number really leads us to that. Like we're like evaluate. Okay,
4
now it's
always
like time
comes
to make
before
these
5.
changes.
Yeah.
Yeah, fascinating.
Yeah. So there were also a lot of retrogrades. Like Mars was in Aries for an extremely long time. This year, longer than any other year. And I mean, going back a long time. But it was retrograde for a long portion of that leading up to the election. So that created some interesting angst and problems as well. Mars loves being in Aries. That's its sign, so it's kind of exalted there. Mars is very much, I liken Mars all the time to maybe an 18-year-old who's gung-ho, just joined the military, maybe has a lot of energy to offer, but the prefrontal cortex isn't all the way developed and they have no impulse control. So Mars can be kind of brash and actions first before really thinking it through. So there's that energy of let's just do it, before we've even thought through what all the consequences are. So that energy was in Aries where it was exalted for a long part of, I think it started in the summer and it went into the fall. But for part of that time, it was retrograde. So when a planet is retrograde, it's not lending its full energy to the situation. And then you're in this space of Mars in Aries and conjuncting and scoring a lot of other planets, but it's almost like it's kind of not fully present. It's distracted in some way. So it was a lot of angst, a lot of squares. I think of try to explain squares as being catalysts for change. Arguing happens during squares. My husband and I have a lot of squares in our combined relationship chart. We argue all the time, bicker all the time, but we make so much progress through that process, right? Of just hashing it out and seeing other perspectives. And so we've seen that happen in the world around us, especially in the United States, with everybody just really kind of at each other's throats on social media and with their own perspective. And sometimes that kind of thing has to happen in order for us to make progress, to move forward and to hear each other out. I think we're all kind of enlightened to know that we have friends that think very differently than us that we didn't realize before. So we've kind of heard and seen and are more aware that there's other perspectives that maybe were not as loud in the past or not as present to us. So that's kind of the macrocosm of what 2020 was about, and kind of we're moving into 2021, which is more about air signs, Aquarius, leading us into the age of Aquarius. Technology is covered by Aquarius. Social justice is covered by Aquarius. Intellectual thinking. It's just a much more flexible air sign, and we were coming out of that really heavy earth and comfortable. We were really comfortable in those earth Capricorn era, the industrial age. It was very comfortable. So you're seeing also what you're seeing here is this kind of, there's some people that aren't ready to leave that behind, and that was very comfortable for them and they want to hold on to the old. This kind of Saturn way of let's not throw out the baby with the bathwater. But then there's a lot of people that are ready to totally move into the new age and move into a new way of thinking and a new way of being more progressive. So you have this kind of challenge within society when that kind of a big change is happening. So that's the macrocosm. The microcosm, I have some notes here on the microcosm. I did some people asked me to do a prediction on the election. I was like, oh God. So I did a prediction on the election. And I looked at it from a little bit of a different perspective than most people, most astrologers. And I found that even some of my go-to astrologers that I regularly read and follow had very differing perspectives. And some of them seemed like they were reading the astrology correctly, but their own bias was also playing into their prediction. And so I thought, oh my gosh, I really have to look at this for myself and then see what they're seeing. And
I
in
think
one
that
case,
I just want to touch on that.
very
It's
different.
very hard as an astrologer or a psychic or whatever not to put your own biases in there to a
Yeah.
degree, because that's how we see the world. So yeah, I think that's always, and that goes with tarot card readers or any type of person that's using some kind of intuitive gift to predict information.
Yeah. So knowing that an astrologer that I really respect was predicting a Trump win, I thought, wow, let me really look at that and see. And he was right about the Trump win in 2016. So I thought I really need to look at that. And so I looked at it and I thought I'm going to look at it the way that I look at astrology, which is different. I use cards of destiny, and I use also a little bit of astrological tarot. And so I did my own thing. It was really interesting. The United States in cards of destiny is a Jack of Diamonds, and I'm a Jack of Diamonds, so I get that. And the Jack of Diamonds is really about making wealth, making money. It's an entrepreneur card. And so a lot of times things will happen in my personal life that I find are kind of the microcosm of what's happening in the United States, macrocosm. And I think that's because of that similarity I have being the Jack of Diamonds. The United States birthday is obviously July 4th. Some people use different dates. Some people say the first time the word United States was invoked is the date they use. I tend to pretty much just stick with July 4th as the birth date of the United States when looking at astrology. So I looked at Trump's astrology, and I looked at his card of destiny. And he's a 3 of diamonds. And so when I looked at 3 of diamonds and what they have, it totally spoke to who he is. And it's so interesting because I have a daughter who's also 3 of diamonds. So as I'm reading
That's
for
really
Donald
fascinating.
Trump, I'm also reading for my daughter. And so you start to see like how people can be so different and so similar in some ways, like in some foundational ways. I also saw that, my daughter has a tendency towards being self-centric, and she could probably be a nightmare if I just indulged her in everything she wanted. And so maybe Donald Trump's parents indulged him a little too much, I'm not sure. But definitely there's a nurture relationship to who we are as people, not just, everything's not just destined in the cards. But so for 3 of diamonds, he sees things from a different perspective. He sees 2 directions at once, very sensitive. Fear of abandonment and betrayal, tends to sabotage intimate relationships. He honestly believes he's the victim all the time. That's part of the 3 of diamonds. I see that with my daughter too. She always believes that she's been wronged, but that's part of her way of winning. She's very competitive. So he has it really hugely, he accesses that a lot. He's a Gemini. He was born during a moon eclipse, which is really interesting. A lot of times kings are born during moon eclipses. He has Jupiter in his 2nd house, so that's all about wealth. And he has a lot of planets in his 10th house, which is your fame house. So a lot of astrologers were really reading into that he has this kind of moon eclipse birth, which is a king kind of kingmaker's aspect. And he has these very powerful planets in his 10th house of fame. He did rise to become president of the United States, so that makes a lot of sense. But then I wanted to look at what's going on for him right now. So I looked, when you do a spread of the cards of destiny, which is the original playing card deck, it used to be, it's an ancient astrological calendar. So when you do a spread, you can see what year a particular card has. So like for Donald is a 3 of diamonds. So for 3 of diamonds, their 2020 card was a 9 of diamonds, and their 2021 card is the 9 of spades. Both of those cards are about financial loss and completion of cycles. The 9 of diamonds specifically is about a completion of a cycle of values, of pursuit, an ending of a work of pursuit that is valued. So it really talked about like a career ending or a career change time, and also has financial losses tied to it. So to me, that didn't really speak too loudly about him winning the election. It really sounded like it's a closure year for him. And then in 2021, he has the 9 of spades, which is about loss and disappointment, the end of an occupation or the end of a way of life. And so I thought that neither of those cards for 2020 or 2021 are screaming that he's just going to keep on trucking along in his same career. They're actually saying that he's going to have a very big shift in his career. And so based on that, I then looked at Joe Biden's cards to see, was he going to, having a different outlook? Joe Biden doesn't have a typical chart of like a king. He has a sun Scorpio. We might have had one other Scorpio president ever. His moon is in Taurus, but he has some aspects in his chart that talk about living a life of sacrifice. And we've really seen that with him. He's had family members die. He's really had to be of service to other people. He's really had to get through a lot of hardships. So his chart is really a lot about living a life of sacrifice. And I really feel that's very karmic for him. He has Mars in Scorpio at 12 degrees. And on election day, Mercury was going to go direct in Scorpio at 12 degrees.
Oh, that's really interesting.
Yeah, and when I was doing his reading, I always pull an astrological tarot card from my deck, and I pulled the Mars card for his reading. And so when I looked at Mars, specifically Mars, Scorpio, 12 degrees, election day, Mercury turning direct in Scorpio, where it had gone retrograde at 12 degrees. So I thought that's actually touching him in a very specific way on that day. His card is the King of Hearts, which is the Master of Love card, recognized for his goodness, holds power in silence of your like deep knowing. So it's unlike other kings, right? So I thought, oh, that's interesting that he has a King of Hearts card, because we don't see king too much in his Western astrology reading, but then he's this King of Hearts card, but it's a different kind of king. And so I thought that makes sense that we have these two very different, both older white men, but also very different in their philosophies, right? So kind of equal in that they're both kings, but just with very different perspectives. His 2020 card was the Ace of Hearts, which is the father card. New relationships, birth of creativity, new beginnings. So he, unlike Donald Trump, has new beginnings card. And then if you look at his 2021 card, it's the Ace of Diamonds. So it's the birth of a new way of earning money, cycle of creating, new financial enterprise. So here he has almost the exact opposite year cards of Donald Trump. He has new beginnings, new ways of earning money, new ways of being. And so to me, that was pretty obvious right there that one of these candidates has a very positive spread and the other candidate has a very ending spread, which, is positive in its own way, because everything has to shift and change at some point. Then I looked at
just for everyone. I mean, like an ending is but a new beginning. I mean,
right, yeah.
And I think we did a podcast on this, on some of the themes of COVID and the pandemic, and I feel like what a lot of this is bringing up is this fear of endings, this fear of death, either literally or metaphorically. And as a psychic, I'm like, look, death is not the boogeyman. Like, I mean, I know, of course, we there can be some trauma and some challenging aspects to it, but it doesn't have to be that way either. It can be very beautiful and basically like this birthing to the other side. And I feel like a lot of these themes and fear and like our negative perspective on certain things that are just a part of life, like if you live, you die, that's literally how it goes, is really coming up in these last couple of years for us to review and address and hopefully shift some of that intense perspective on it.
Yeah. So then I took another step and I looked at Kamala's where she's at and her relationship to Joe Biden. And it's interesting because Joe Biden, as well as having year cards, each card has another card that they owe a karmic debt to, or that owes them a karmic debt. So when you meet people whose birthdays fall under the card that owes you a karmic debt, those are people that you might meet in life and they might help you out in some way. Or you might meet people that you owe a karmic debt to, and those might be people that you end up helping out in some way. So it's always kind of interesting to know what your card is and whose birthdays fall under your karmic debt card or your karmic owed card, so that when you meet people and you start new relationships, just in general in business or whatever, you kind of know where the energy is around that. Kamala is actually Joe Biden owes Kamala a karmic debt. Her card is the 2 of clubs, and that's Joe Biden's karmic debt card. So to me, that is really interesting because I don't see that kind of relationship between Pence and Trump or anyone else in this sphere of the political. I looked up a couple different people, Bill Barr, different people, and I didn't see those kind of karmic relationships, but very clearly there's a karmic relationship between Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. And I know other astrologers looking at it purely from a Western perspective were saying that there was some karmic relationships there. I can't remember exactly what aspects they were in their synergy chart, but in the cards of destiny, it shows up as well. So it seems like Kamala maybe couldn't get into the position that she's in without Joe's help. So somehow Joe kind of rose to the place where he's at in his life of sacrifice and service to help Kamala Harris get into the vice president role and perhaps someday even into the president role. So I see that playing out.
Just want to also mention that if you haven't explored the cards of destiny, I think they're super fascinating. And Jennifer and I did a reading where she looked at mine, and mine is the Queen of Clubs. And I've heard it described a few ways, but one of them is like I think the Mother of Intuition card, or it's very much about intuition. It's like, here we are, professional psychic. Like I remember
the Mother Mary card, they call it.
Yeah, the first time I read all that, and I was like, yep, that's pretty much it. So if you haven't explored that, I definitely would encourage people to look into that particular type of astrology, because there's so many different types of astrology, and I've always found it very resonant, but it's one that isn't talked about that much. Like, I don't feel like most people know about this particular type or branch of astrology.
I have studied astrology for over 20 years, and I only learned about it 6 or 7 years ago. So it's definitely not that well known. I think it's getting to be a little bit more well known. There's only really a couple of authors that still write about it. There's starting to be, like, I just got a new app on my phone. Let me see if I can tell you the name of it. There's starting to be some apps that will help you to like calculate your own very easily, or you can get a book, or there's online websites as well. But there's an app that I like, it's called My Destiny Cards. So I just download that on my phone, and then I just plug in all my friends' birthdays. I see where we're all related, and I keep track of it there.
There's one that I have, and I don't know if it's that one or a different one, but it actually tells you what your daily card and your weekly and annual card is. So it kind of gives you sort of overall themes, like exactly how that plays out. You don't necessarily know, but at least it gives.
This app does that. Also,
okay, nice.
There's probably a couple different apps. So it's really helpful. So I looked at all of that with Joe and Kamala, and it was really interesting to see that there's definitely I also was thinking, as I was trying to do the prediction for the election, like, there's no way that these two people have this karmic destiny together, and they've come together. Her cards of destiny card for this year next are all about partnerships. So they came together in this karmically destined, relationship with Joe there to help Kamala, and there's no way that's going to play out in them just not winning. Right. So it seemed like he has these very beginning cards, starting a new career, new ways of earning money. She has this karmic destiny with him, and they were definitely on a train to somewhere. Unlike Donald Trump, who had ending cards. And so I predicted in October that Biden was going to win the election. I didn't know at that time. It was so tumultuous. I said, maybe he's not, maybe there's going to be fraud, or something's going to happen, or it's going to be contested. I don't know, because it seemed like a lot of people were really feeling strongly that Trump was going to win. And so I didn't know how it was going to play out, but I knew at the end of the day, it's an end time for Donald Trump, and it's the beginning time for a new era. I also was thinking back to the macrocosm of who's really aligned with this shift into the age of Aquarius and progressive thinking. And I know that one astrologer was really thinking that Donald Trump represented freedom. And that was just hit me so strangely, because I don't see it that way. And so I know a lot of people do see it that way. The anti-masker movement is all about thinking that Trump is their savior for preserving their freedoms. But I was thinking of it of the perspective of so many people lost their freedoms under this presidency, the Muslim travel ban, the people stuck at the border in Mexico. So many people felt like they couldn't move about. I had friends who didn't want to leave the country because they weren't sure if their visas were going to get renewed. So to me, he didn't represent freedom. So there's these two different perspectives. that was
It's
kind
it's
of clouding the water, you know?
it's really fascinating to me with the whole political situation. And I just want to share, I want to honor what people feel, you know, their perspective on it. And it's really quite polarizing. And I feel that there are people that I know who are extremely intelligent on either side of the equation. And then the other thing that I really would like to caution everyone against is basically saying, if you believe X, you must also believe this other thing, because that's really part of what's happened with this kind of polarization is like, if you're for freedom, then you're for this person. And one person might feel like it's Trump and one person might feel like Biden, or, you know, or even in different countries might be different people. But, you know, for us that there's a lot of gray, and for us all to not judge other people for different perspectives. I just think that's really important. Anyway, thanks for bringing that up, because I think that is also very fascinating.
Yeah, so I think that was really interesting because there's a lot about freedom and progressive movements and technology that's all related to Aquarius. And so if we kind of just keep that in our mind, that that's where we're headed, and that doesn't align with keeping with the old ways. At the same time, I was like, both of these candidates are old white men, right? And that's not really aligned with the age of Aquarius, which is a much more feminine movement. But it does make sense that we would have the beginning of some female leadership with a female vice president. So to me, having a woman on the ticket was also aligned with the bigger picture. So I went ahead and predicted for Joe. So then moving into kind of more where we're at right now, there was some really interesting stuff that happened in November astrologically and December. And now January, it still hasn't fully played out, but we're seeing huge things happening in the United States, especially. So obviously astrology isn't just tied to the United States, it's the whole world, right? But I've been mostly focused on looking at it, how it relates to the United States. But I think we can, you know, when we saw that President Trump was elected in 2016, we saw that similar type leaders were elected in other countries around the same time. So
a lot of similarities with like Boris Johnson and Trump.
Yeah. So whatever country you're in, you're going to see these same energies playing out, however that makes sense in where you are. I've just been looking at it from where I'm at here in the United States. We saw a full moon October 1st at like about 8-9 degrees Gemini. And I like to look at the degrees sometimes when I'm looking at the immediate what's going on. The degrees of each sign each have their own message. And there's been some work done on this, that there's people who are saying that if you have a lot of planets at 22, 23, 24, like in the 20s degree area, that might tie you to past lives in the Pleiades. I've never resonated with past lives in the Pleiades. I know some people are really into that, but when I look at my chart, I don't have planets in those degrees. So maybe that's not where my past soul life is from. So I'm just starting to kind of learn a little bit more about some of those kind of new out there astrological ideas. But there is something to be said for looking at the degrees and where things are happening astrologically. So when I looked into Gemini 9 degrees, that Gemini 9 degrees is the degree of homicide. I was like, wow, Gemini 9 degrees. So there was that full moon October 1st, and that's when family announced that they all had COVID. Did you lose me?
Yeah, I like literally froze. I heard homicide and then it froze for like, so if you could just repeat that whole section.
Homicide of my connection. I think I'm back on. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can hear you now.
I think I just had a glitch in my Wi-Fi connection. So what I was saying is that I found this really obscure references to that Gemini 9 degrees is a placement or about homicide. And so I thought, what does that mean in relationship to our world astrology? And that was the time that at that full moon that the first family announced that they all had COVID. And so I was like, well, this is not good. And then I looked ahead into November, December, January to see what else was happening at 9 degrees Gemini into the future. And so there was also a full moon eclipse on November 30th happening at the same degree, like it was like 8.43, I think, degrees Gemini. And I looked at both Trump and Biden's charts, and Biden didn't really have much going on at that degree. But Trump's midheaven, which if you think about your midheaven, it's a place right above you when you were born. It's related to your 10th house. It's your place of fame and your position in the world. His midheaven is exactly 8 degrees Gemini. So he was definitely being touched by this big eclipse in November. And we kind of saw a little piece of it before on October 1st at the full moon happening at the same degree. And so I was predicting that by November 30th eclipse, he was really going to be out of the race. That was going to be kind of decided in the world's perspective for him. And I decided that 9-degree Gemini, that one reference I found called the homicide degree, was really more for him in relationship to his midheaven about career suicide. So around November 30th, I think is when he was starting to really talk up fraud in the election, and the courts were really starting to say they weren't going to support him in that. So that seems like it was a pivotal timeline for him to really be out of the election. And then we saw there was some fallout from that. There was still a lot of disbelief going into December. And then, so when I looked at, I have this beautiful calendar, which I use. A lot of astrologers use a couple of different calendars created by other astrologers that keep track of all of our aspects in the calendar and what degrees they're falling at. So this one's by Susan Miller that I like. And so I was looking ahead into some of the other things happening, and I did a whole December prediction. But in January, kind of talking about where we're at right now, there wasn't any specific aspects happening around the 7th when the Capitol riot happened. So that's the play out of things that happened in December, kind of leading up to the Capitol being sieged.
I want to make a point of that too, which is that I think we can look to astrology and it gives us some themes and information, but there's still other things that are not going to be there. You know, it's not going to tell us everything. I think it's a really great tool, but that's a perfect example of like, that was huge. And not just in the United States, but in the scope of the world. You know, I was in London when that was happening, and like the whole world was like shocked about that whole situation. Well, like, so yeah.
Susan Miller pointed out that date around January 6th or 7th is the exact opposite of a hard aspect that we had on July 4th. And so I was bracing on July 4th because that was the aspect everybody was saying was like the Civil War aspect on July 4th. And I was bracing for it and nothing really happened. But 6 months later, we see it's the opposite. And so sometimes in astrology, things can happen a year and a day later. It can happen at the opposite time, 6 months later. Eclipses, sometimes we don't get their news until a month and a day later or a month and a day earlier. So it just depends on all the other energies at play as to when that message is going to deliver. So this actually, what happened on the 6th and 7th of January was something that was triggered on the July 4th eclipse.
Interesting.
Yeah. On January 12th, we have a new moon at 23 degrees Capricorn. We had that last week. And Mercury was squaring Uranus in retrograde at exactly 7 degrees Aquarius Taurus. I say exactly 7 degrees. It's like 6 point something, but it's close to 7 degrees Taurus. And then we had the same thing happening, Venus trining Uranus in retrograde at 7 degrees Taurus. So I'm starting to see these 7 degrees Taurus popping up now. And that was the 12th to 13th. That's when the impeachment happened again, right? So Mercury involved in that makes total sense. Mercury's about communication. And then we see Uranus goes direct at 7 degrees Taurus on the 14th. And then I am looking ahead on the 17th today. There's a Jupiter square Uranus, which can be kind of an erratic or hasty decision, can lead to loss. So Jupiter makes things big, squaring Uranus, which is a planet of surprise news or surprise events. And that's taking place today at the same 7 degrees. So sometimes we don't know what's going on in other people's lives or in the world. So when we're thinking about politics, we might find out later that some behind the scenes meeting or something happened over this weekend that we won't hear the news of until next week. I'm also thinking like as this planning is leading up to the election, the inauguration on the 20th, at first I heard that Joe Biden was going to take the train to the inauguration. And I thought, oh, that sounds so dangerous, given that on the 20th, we have a really challenging aspect, which is Mars conjuncting Uranus. Uranus is the same planet that's been in play through all these aspects happening at 7 degrees Taurus. And so again, at 7 degrees Taurus, Mars is conjuncting Uranus. Mars is that power, don't really think things through, take action planet. And Uranus is unexpected surprises and twists. So it's going to be the energy of that day is really about hasty decisions.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I feel that, like, I still don't know exactly what's going to happen. I still feel like there's more drama to play out. Like, I don't think it's done in terms of like that kind of things out of left field, kind of wild energy. So yeah.
So I looked at Joe Biden's birth chart to see what is happening at 7 degrees Taurus for him. Like, is he in danger? How's this going to play out? He has his part of fortune, which is kind of an old aspect that we don't look at too closely anymore in astrology, but it speaks to good fortune. It's the place, it's like a calculated aspect. It's the place where the sunlight and the moonlight, like one stops and the other starts in your chart. So it's like halfway between. And so I thought that's really interesting that at his part of fortune is at 7 degrees Taurus. He's definitely going to be affected by whatever's going on here at 7 degrees Taurus, with these planets touching off to each other. And however it plays out, it could be something that we consider normally very negative. There could be an attack or something like that could happen. Somehow it's going to benefit him because it's touching his part of fortune. So maybe the world will have sympathy for him after whatever happens. I don't know how it's going to play out, but my intuition is that something's going to happen and it's going to actually cause people to pull together maybe and support him a little bit more, have some empathy for him. And then the other thing that's really concerning to me is that same 7 degrees Taurus, we see it again on the 26th. So there's a sun square Uranus at 7 degrees Taurus on the 26th. And whenever the sun gets involved, the sun is like the parent of the astrological signs. And so whenever the sun gets involved, it's like some serious shit has gone down and now the sun has stepped in. You've got attention and she is like telling the kids how to behave, right? But I feel like whatever happens on the inauguration day isn't really going to be complete until the 26th, because it's still, that aspect is still in play, that 7 degrees Taurus is still being touched. So there's something that's going to continue it, or it's not going to really feel final or completed until the 26th.
Yeah, that makes sense. I actually did an interview on the podcast, The Only One in the Room, talking about election predictions. And I didn't say exactly what was going to play out, but I did say this is going to be a long drama, whatever this is, the whole unfolding of the election. I knew it wasn't going to be just like, and then whoever is president, like I just knew it was going to be this long kind of battle. And I did say it might be a physical battle, which is not what I wanted, by the way. Like, I want a peaceful, time for all, but I don't, this doesn't surprise me that you're saying this. And I am having another one of those feelings like I did last year of, I feel something coming. There's still a lot of building happening kind of energetically, spiritually. So you actually did a post, I think, on Facebook, which is one of the things that inspired me to reach out to you, but you were saying like around the time of the inauguration and afterwards, I recommend for people not to get, really involved externally, kind of focus more at home. And I would just reiterate that suggestion.
Yeah.
For people.
I don't recommend anyone goes to a protest. It's not going to be, it's not going to be an easy time astrologically. The energy's really high. The tensions are really high. Mars and Uranus together is like the scariest family reunion you could have, right? It's very much about that, like 18-year-old gung-ho, maybe doesn't have all the facts, energy. And then Uranus is the planet of surprise, unexpected events. So nothing is going to be very predictable when Uranus is involved and you have the Mars energy with it.
Right.
So unless you really want to live in that world, I recommend keeping your head down and staying. You can also check your own birth chart to see if you have anything going on at 7 degrees Taurus. If you have Mars at 7 degrees Taurus, you might really want to be careful. And you might also think about how we're talking about politics in the inauguration, but whatever's going on in your life could come to an head around 7 degrees Taurus. So sometimes those things are unavoidable.
Right.
I know we all have free will, but sometimes I've seen things happen in my life where I could just see the energy building and I see it coming and I just know how it's going to turn out because I could just see it in the stars that those touch points are happening. And sometimes it can be good. Sometimes you can be interviewing for a job and you see that it's coming, it's good, and you know you're going to get the job. And sometimes it can be a split up in a relationship or wherever that is touching you in your horoscope is you're going to see that come to fullness or the potential for that energy to be there.
So this is really interesting, and I definitely been getting message to learn more about astrology, and thank you for helping all of us at least get bits of this. I know that astrology is quite complex, so it's not like we're all like, oh, now we're all experts on astrology.
It's so complex. Sometimes I even go, oh my God, this is so deep. I could go into so many rabbit holes on so many different parts of astrology, and I've been doing it for 20 years, but it's I think it's also good to always look at the macrocosm perspective too, and know before you get too deep into one worry or one concern, just to kind of always bring it back up to like, oh, we're moving into this 5-year where we have choices and we can make changes and we have creative energy. And so we can always kind of keep a bigger picture.
Yeah. No, I feel the same, and I definitely want to dive in more, but thank you for at least giving some overall themes that it'll help. And it's amazing how even one little tip can help us shift our energy or perspective on something. And the other thing I want to share is that whatever is happening in the sort of macrocosm, we can choose how we're handling it on the microcosm, and that there is a significant impact that we have, like through our reaction or non-reaction or whatever it is that we're doing, we do impact the macro scale. I think it's easy for us to forget sometimes just what a big impact we actually do have.
Yeah, we're all playing off each other.
Yes, exactly. Oh my gosh. Well, this is so fun. Thank you so much for talking with us today about all this. So if people want to learn more, connect with you, do you do private readings? Just share whatever it is that you want to share, social media handles, info, etc.
Yeah, so I have my website at iamjenquintana.com. And so on there, you can find my services if you want me to run your birth chart for you, do your Cards of Destiny reading. I also have the Modern Mystical Mama blog, which is tied to my website. And then I have my Instagram is Modern Mystical Mama. So you can find me at both those places. And then I run my retreat center here on Maui, Hale, Kauka Healing Garden. And you can find my Hale, Kauka Healing Garden Instagram and Facebook pages.
Amazing. Yeah. And I can definitely test because I've been there. It's gorgeous. Like I said, I'm in London, which I love London. Back. But yeah, I'm like, oh, I believe it. That's what I'm saying. Like in the last time that we talked on a podcast, like so much has happened, like in the world as well as individually. So yeah, I know you guys have done a lot of work on the property, and yes, I'd love to come back.
Yay.
Well, awesome. Thank you again, Jennifer, for talking with us. I really appreciate it.
Thanks.
And thank you everybody for listening. If you'd like more information about me, you can go to my website, healingpowers.net. You can find me at Twitter at Laura Powers, Instagram at Laura Powers 44, and on Facebook at Healing Powers. Many blessings to you.